Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a great group already with us, and I expect some more to trickle in. I'm Bobby Lauer. I'm the president of Campus Compact. And thank you for finding the time to be with us this afternoon, or at least it's the afternoon on the East Coast. I guess it's still a little bit of late morning on the West Coast. Today is our first session in a new series that Campus Compact has started called Resourcing for Success. And this is really an outgrowth of a number of conversations, some of which I recognize some names here that we've had together, which is really looking to identify more pathways, resources, support conversations, and just spaces for us as a field and as a collective to talk about how we do resource cultivation, to understand the challenges and the opportunities around fundraising for civic and community engagement. So this series of events that we're going to be having between now and June are intended to get right at that. We're going to have conversations on endowed centers and institutes and pathways for creating those. We have another session on professorships and internships and what it looks like to get funding approaching those very specific opportunities. We're going to have a session that we haven't announced yet, but that we're going to be putting together in May. And I happen to see one of our attendees here today is going to be featured in that. And that's going to be on federal earmarks. And what are the opportunities for getting federal earmarks to advance community and civic engagement goals? And what might that look like for you to think about doing in the future? But we're kicking this series off with a good friend and long-term colleague of mine, David Weerts from University of Minnesota. David is somebody who I will never forget, and I have told David this many times. I was a participant in the very first class of the Engagement Academy for University Leaders in the summer of 2007 at Virginia Tech. And David's one session that he led during that series was about fundraising. And he did a case study on, I think I see James Rowland is in here from Emory, and he did a case study on Emory. And I remember it was so striking for me. I went back to Towson University where I was working at the time and said, we have to reimagine how we are framing our work and how we think differently around messaging. And so it's been a long time since 2007. And David's work in this field has only grown. And today, I think we all would agree in the field that he's really the resident expert around resource cultivation and civic and community engagement. Today, he's at the University of Minnesota, where he's a professor of higher ed, and he also serves as the faculty director for academic planning and programs with the Office of Public Engagement. And we are thrilled to have him with us. And I'm going to, with that, turn it over to David.
Well, thank you so much, Bobby, and great to see all of you. It's really a thrill to be on this call. And I remember that too, Bobby, is back in the day, many years ago, and a little background to that for how I've kind of gotten connected with this field and this work. As by way of a little background and introduction, I come to this work a little bit from an odd duck direction here, coming from more of the State Relations and Advancement Office. During that time when I had met Bobby, before that, I had just graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in my higher ed PhD program. And what really got me kind of interested in this work was I was working for the Chancellor's office. At that time, it was mostly for an internship as a graduate student, and I worked with state relations. And at the time, those of you, many of you have done PhDs, you're wrestling like, what am I going to write for my dissertation? All of these different kind of topics. And what I never forget is there was a state relations person there named Charlie who held up a map of the US, and it showed the Chronicle of Higher Ed used to run these different states that were investing at different amounts in different states. So they had +8 in one state, -5, +3. And so what was interesting is Charlie said to me, he said, you know, an interesting question would be, why do some states invest more in higher education, and particularly their research university, more than others? And so I took that to heart. I did a study on that, and lo and behold, one of the critically important things I found all those years ago was that a lot of institutions, especially many like yours, when I look at who's participating today, used engagement as kind of a competitive strategy to think about funding their work in terms of building political and public support to build engaged institutions to build more financial sustainability among their state legislators. So that really got me thinking about that. Not only is this important work for mission fulfillment of our public work, but it's actually really important around our broader ideas and opportunities to gain revenue. And after that, I actually went into more of the fundraising advancement area for practice. And related to that in engagement, one of the important things I learned is that in many cases, people were giving to the University of Wisconsin, not just out of loyalty to the university as alums and the experience they had there, but in many cases, it was seen as a means to accomplish something larger in society. And that could be around like restoration ecology, well-being of families and children. And so these major donors, weren't making $1 million gifts because they love their old English department, although we all love our old English department. But it's one of these things where it was a broader idea about why they were involved. So the point here is, again, is not only engagement is the right thing around fulfilling our mission, but it can really help us think about building resource base for that. So with that, I am going to screen share some slides to bring this in. Okay. And can you all see that, Bobby? You give me the okay? Okay. So one of the things I will say too, as we go into this is, and Bobby, maybe if you could help me monitor the chat on this, if I'm missing hands or things, I'm going to stop at different points for people for questions. But as we all know, doing this, sometimes it's hard to see who's chiming in with different things. But I'm going to walk through these set of slides, but really meaning for this to be interactive, and I will save time as well at the end for conversation about this. So here's what's kind of on our plate today for agenda and the work that we think about this session ahead of us. So one of the things I want to start out with is a little bit of Advancement 101. So that is to say, what's some of the language and key terms, the development cycle, which we'll talk about, the life of a major gifts officer, and then making sense of our role in the community engagement space in this work. So the spoiler alert here is that you all have incredibly important roles and are incredible assets to your institutions and advancement colleagues in this work. So I think what I hope at the end of this session is that people might see themselves in a new light and have confidence around the importance of building this work alongside and really deeply embedded within the institution. And then we're going to explore some challenges, but also strategies to work effectively with advancement. And then we'll have some questions and discussion as well. So this first slide, I want to just kind of say a couple of things about to give some baseline around language definition and fund categories. Maybe the first area I draw your attention to is the bottom there with the general question that sometimes come up. What's the difference between a donation and a gift? So one of the things I would say about this is for any of you who would ever spend time in residence life or student affairs, I remember when I did that, we're first out of undergraduate school, if you ever used the word dorm, it was like the worst thing you could say because it's really residence hall, right? And so there was a kind of this thing like, oh, if you're using the dorm, word dorm, it's not representative like of the innovation and where we want this field to go. There's a little bit like that in the advancement world as well. Whereas gift or giving is really more about a relational commitment going behind a simple transaction, where a donation is really something more like when you go to Goodwill and you donate some clothes or things like that that are kind of on the spot and they're more transactional in nature. So that's just kind of something that we think about when you're talking to your colleagues in advancement around knowing that as a point. Another piece we'll just kind of quickly mention is around gifts versus contracts. So I think to differentiate what we're talking about today are really the set of gifts, which differs from contracts in the sense that contracts are really more these sponsored projects for hire, which we're all familiar with. So you have a client who's paying for some kind of outcome or service tied to funding. And then that client, might be closely involved with the work of this project. So it might be distributing a survey on behalf of an organization or some kind of community work that is more of a contractual nature. What we're really talking about here are gifts that are initiated by institution and donor for the broad support of a particular initiative. And this is not, this is to distinguish that donors in this case are not involved in overseeing the work. In that sense, for all of you, you could probably relate in your office where you wouldn't want a donor to be telling you who to hire, what you're doing, how to do the practice of the work. Although we might be working with partners in ways that inform the direction, it's different from a contract in that sense. And then in these three areas around giving, there's some categories of fund categories to make explicit here. The first is restricted. And so what that is, are these restricted gifts or funds are really for a specific purpose, and they can't be altered without talking to the donor. So if somebody's making a gift around a particular area, let's say it's community engagement, somebody at the institution can't come along and say, you know, that'd be a lot better use, you know, for the new football stadium or something like that. So it protects the donor, it protects the institution about where these gifts will go. And there's usually through a memorandum of understanding that works. Unrestricted gifts or kind of discretionary accounts, these are gifts that can be really used for a broad variety of purposes designated by campus leaders. So the nice thing about these gifts for institutions is they have a lot of flexibility on their use. They can apply it for current needs that might pop up that might not be on the radar of donors when they're making gifts. So those are broad, important kind of categories as well. Endowment is a specific kind of a gift or giving to an endowment where you're preserving the principal and you're using the income stream for program purposes. So these are ones kind of similar to, you might think about your retirement accounts where you want to use the interest and not the principal, where these are managed over time. So that's a little bit about some of the general categories about the language and the gifts and how we think about this. Are there any just questions about this in terms of terminology, and some of these things are a little interchangeable, or we'll keep rolling? Okay, hearing none. Here's a walkthrough of how the field of advancement thinks about this kind of work in terms of the kinds of donors, where they're giving, and how it relates to a set of kind of gifts retrieved, in this case, by a college or university. So let's kind of have a scenario here. Bobby, I had in my head that I may use you as an example here of walking through of this pyramid. So let's say you're looking at the bottom of the pyramid. An annual gift, mailings, events, and the phone. So this is a case where, let's say Bobby's having dinner at her home and she notices a text or a phone call that has the area code of her place where she went to school, her alma mater, and she picks up and she gets a call saying, Bobby, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to give you an update on what's happening at our institution. This ends with kind of an ask about, would you consider giving to the annual fund? And so what this is often unrestricted gift that goes to the large pot of money at the institution. And that's kind of how it would work. It's somewhat transactional, a little bit more on the donation side, although there's a relationship there in terms of Bobby's alma mater. And so those are very important initial gifts. And then you go up the pyramid a bit and you see the major gift category. So this involves, is more of a restricted gift. And this would be around something that there might be a high level of thought or investment into a particular gift. So thinking Bobby again, let's say, you know, I'm going to make you a landscape architect major here at the moment. So she did landscape architecture, and the dean in that department finds out through various sources that she's been very successful and maybe have gotten some money from an estate that was willed to her. And knowing that Bobby has been every year giving a little bit to the annual fund, there's a meeting that happens and say, will you consider having a conversation about a larger commitment to this work we know that you care about in landscape architecture? So at that point, there's a series of, and we'll talk about it, cultivation, that there's connection to Bobby, and there's various groups that might get involved with these discussions. So you'll notice an asterisk here. It says volunteer. So, and in the bottom, it says, this person might be you. Why do I put that? So in the context of many of you who are doing this work, it's funny, in the volunteer language in our work, and engagement means something very different from the advancement folks. My work with the advancement folks, they talk about volunteers in terms of those people. It might be faculty, staff, even students or other board members that might come alongside to help make an ask for a major gift on something of this regard. So maybe Bobby feels like I want to make a $50,000 gift to support student scholarships in this area. Well, then over time, it goes on, and then at some point, she's thinking about the end of her career. Bobby says about the commitment she has to landscape architecture, and then she makes what they might call a lifetime or ultimate gift through estate and plan giving, and these were typically restricted as well. So at that point, after a long cultivation and interest, she said, you know what, in my will or my estate, I want to create the endowed Bobby Lauer Center for Landscape Architecture. These are typically restricted. Sometimes you see odd occurrences that people in their will leave large gifts and estate gift to an institution, and you don't even know. It's kind of one of these like Monopoly moments where you pick up the card and like you just inherited. That happens on occasion, not a lot. But I mentioned that as how we conceptualize kind of up the ladder with the pyramid. So a couple of things to mention about this are the differences between these gift categories. So annual giving, you see in the red here, one of the big things is that this makes up 90% of gifts, for example, that would come to a campaign, but really a smaller 10% of the dollars. These are frequently asked. Many of you get calls every year from your alma mater asking for a gift. It comes out of discretionary income, maybe 2 to 5% of income, although 5, I think it feels a little high for me. This is from my colleague, Don Gray, a longtime mentor at Wisconsin. And the reason we talk about this is a very important gift. You say, oh, what does it matter that somebody gives $100 here, that, and the other thing? It's very critical because one of the things we know about is the most important predictor of future giving is past giving. So if you have a record of continued support for your institution, that kind of pre-qualifies you for being interested in continuing the relationship. These major gifts that I mentioned with Bobby as the example, these are infrequently given or asked. It's a much larger percent of what somebody's income would be in terms of the annual fund gift. And this is really where a lot of the action is in terms of advancement, is the investment in this pool, because these 10% of gifts give to about 90% of overall giving, for example, in a year. Very critical to success. And then finally, this kind of ultimate gifts, these are once in a lifetime. This requires kind of long emotional relationship, that somebody really sees themselves within this kind of mission of the institution or particular project or institute or whatever it would be. And so that's a very important part of thinking about how these various gifts fit together. So I'm going to say a little bit, and again, to tribute to my longtime mentor and colleague, Don Gray, who's now emeritus, Vice President Emeritus, Wisconsin Foundation. This is his slide where he adds, I think, some really interesting, like helpful, colorful language to think about what's called the cycle of development. The conventional language you see on the right, where we talk about are these. The cycle includes what's called identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And the general idea here is that there's some, if you go to the left, there's some set of identification and initial contact. that's usually initiated through research staff that says this person has a well screening around that's to be pursued for a major gift, as well as some interest in this in the university. And then Don talks about how do you create the joyful giver. And what this refers to is a set of cultivation that takes place where you have attention, interest, desire, and action. And this is where getting to kind of specific of the work that you're all doing, community engagement professionals can be very active in this particular space around bringing engagement to the fore as a place for what Don calls making the artful ask, or that's solicitation. So when people start to understand the work that's happening in a particular program, meeting students, meeting faculty, they get in a place where they're asked for a gift. And then in Don's slide here, there might be repeated no's, which in that case you move on. But if they do say yes, you then invoke what's more of the stewardship model, where you're invoking what's called the grateful recipient. And so what this is really about is really stewarding this gift in a way so that, let's just say for Bobby's example with landscape architecture, that she's meeting students for which her gift is really supporting in the landscape architecture, and then she's generating additional gift interest. And so this is kind of the cycle then to continue people on the road. The best case scenario, we've heard stories about this happening, is when this kind of comes to fruition and people make these major gifts, there's stories of donors with tears in their eyes thanking the university for the opportunity to give a $20 million gift for this program. And obviously on the other end, maybe there's tears in the eyes of the dean and others who are thrilled that they got the 20 million, right? So this is a way that people are really thinking about their stewardship and work with the university. A couple other things, and I will kind of go through this, is what's the life of a major gifts officer all about? What does it look like? So typically what this looks like is that these major gift officers, they manage a portfolio of these gift prospects, which are people who are somewhere within this cycle that I just showed you. There might be 75 to 125 or so. They're often evaluated in ways, I know this, I was evaluated in this way where I was basically identified in various boxes of prospects I had who were newly identified, but along different stages of the development cycle. They were getting ready to make an ask or made an ask. Certainly some gift totals go along with that evaluation. These are often constituency based, meaning that you might have development directors assigned to a college or unit. I know we have people on today from community colleges that may just have one or two development officers at their institution. Some other folks on the call have several development across units. So it really kind of matters the balance there in terms of understanding your context and where people are at. And then some of the challenges of major gift officer is balancing the expectations of constituency, donor, and the university. What I mean by that is the donor might have some specific interests, but then the constituency, let's say it's the dean of a college of education, they really want to build a new building for their ed school. But then the university says, well, you know what? We actually want this initiative that's even bigger than that. And so it's negotiating that. At times, I'm going to say this for later, there can be a territorial nature of the work in terms of that people say, you know, whose donor is yours, whose are mine, and that can kind of create some tensions. Looking at our time here, are any quick question before I go into? Does this make sense or, okay. So you might ask this question at this point. So thinking about this, this feels kind of far afield from potentially what might be doing these nuts and bolts of community engagement work. So is there a place for engagement within the advancement space and donor involvement related to engagement? So I want to share a unique experience that I had that really got me motivated and excited about thinking about this kind of collaboration around the broad community engagement in our work in advancement. So when I spent those years at Wisconsin as director of development for the graduate school at Wisconsin, and raised money for various programs. But then prior to my kind of faculty role, I took a job also here at the University of Minnesota, where I was regional director of development for the San Francisco Bay Area. So I was the poor guy who had to leave Minnesota in the middle of winter and go to the wine country and, you know, meet people and talk to them about the university and learn about their interests. So in that particular role, what I was told about my role in meeting alumni across the San Francisco Bay Area is that my job was to be kind of flipping rocks, they said, which was basically say to pre-qualify people if they had the inclination and potential capacity to be involved and make a gift. So my advice was kind of to keep things siloed. These folks out there don't really hang together. They had all of their own programs when they were here at the University of Minnesota. And so my approach started out as very one-way in orientation. So I'd kind of fill up my, bag, and I had like brochures for stadium. I had brochures for scholarship. I had brochures for all of this kind of stuff. But what I quickly learned is that people wanted to talk about what they were doing now and what they were talking about doing in their communities and in their regions and what they care deeply about. And so as I started to hear about that and people wanted to have conversation about broad impact of society in the university, I had a chance to bring a faculty member who specialized in the area around civic renewal and citizenship in building a stronger democracy. And we went together and we had short, just kind of round tables that got together, and I emailed people in advance and said, I've been hearing about the interest in the Bay Area. Would you consider having an hour discussion with this faculty member at a local coffee shop to talk about these issues? Well, here was the thing that I learned about that. There was overwhelming enthusiasm for it. We had excellent participation. And the one thing that really got to me is how people came together across traditions, disciplines, and background. So we had somebody who was a vice president of Chevron. We had a teacher, a high-tech entrepreneur, and a grandfather who took his grandson out of school to have this conversation. It was a very rich discussion with these alums and friends at the university. They talked about the university's role in developing engaged alumni to do work in the world. And I remember coming home, and typically what we do then is you're to reach out and say thank you to everyone. Well, my email was already flooded with people saying, this is probably the most meaningful thing that we've been a part of in years, because you let us talk about the things we care about. You connected us back to the social good of the university. And then one person said, and you didn't make us sing the school song at the end, which actually Minnesota's got a great school song. So I was surprised about that. But I tell this story just to say that people are hungry for new ways to reorganize and thinking about their philanthropy and about linking it to broad societal problems, for which the punchline here is community engaged work provides a tremendous opportunity to make these connections to donors and alumni that care deeply about this kind of work. So I share that. And then, so some lessons learned is that I found out that, alums are kind of dissatisfied with a one-way approach to engagement, the more show and tell kind of thing. They have deep civic interests. Many of them have kind of moved on from their major, but they're doing different things now. And they want to be a part of something big and important and know that their alma mater is on the front end of that as well. So these were some of the important things I learned from there. And so there's a little bit more good news in the sense of that this later became connected to my own research around alumni giving, engagement, volunteerism, and political advocacy. This is a link to something that my longtime colleague Alberto Cabrera and I worked on through a decade or so of research in this area. It's disappeared in Case Currents, the magazine. And so here's what we learned that around the connection between civic commitments and giving. is that much of our advancement practices are largely built on what might be called the social exchange model. That is, you had a good experience at the university, you want to give back to your alma mater. In some cases, we see examples of that, but a lot of these empirical studies show that behaviorally, many people report actually having great experiences at their alma mater, but far fewer make a gift. What's more compelling that we found in our research over time is that these giving patterns are better explained by what might be called philanthropic formation. So that is these kind of pro-social experiences developed throughout one's lifetime, including while in college. Well, where do these things get formed at an institution? Many of your centers and community engaged work, civic work that's happening in these particular area. So the simple story is that many of our community engaged students, now alums, are our institution's strongest gift prospects. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into but we actually have these various categories: the eagles, hummingbirds, cheetahs, and koalas, and how they relate. For the purposes of time, I'm not going to go over that, but if people have questions later, it shows kind of the unique orientation to how people fit. Here's another important thing to share with the development, or thinking about the development work, is that engagement provides a really compelling opportunity to link what might be non-alumni donors and bring them to the table. So this is one of my favorite quotes that came from an article from Mark Langseth and Cassie McVitie, who years ago, they were at Portland State in the development area. And they talked about this major gift, this huge capital campaign for Portland State University, which I think probably many of you in this call know about their legacy in this work, Judith Vermeille and others. I love this picture: let knowledge serve the city, really developing their identity as a community engaged institution. So kind of fast forward, or long story short, the majority of their major gifts to their campaign during this period came from non-alums. And this quote is so great from this family that made $1 million gift that says, "We didn't attend Portland State University, but were enrolled in its vision." I think what a very powerful statement to say, we care about our community, we care about our state, and we believe that our $1 million is best placed in the university to make change in this region. That's a very compelling and powerful vision around philanthropy and the link to engagement work. I'm going to share a little bit now about some hurdles in advancing fundraising goals for engagement. And so what we find there is that community engagement centers are in this kind of odd area that I experienced personally when I worked for the graduate school and raising money, is the difficulty about not having their own alumni, quote. So this, one of the ways I mentioned the identification part of the cycle of giving, or of the development cycle. So one of the main things to kind of pre-qualify people, and take a sip, is it's very easy if you're doing constituency-based fundraising. Let's say you work for a business school to raise money. One of the first, most compelling places to run your list, run all of the alums of the business school. Overall, let's say you've got, 50,000 alums or whatever of your business school. So that's becomes a very easy mechanism to be able to say who might have a natural affiliation. This is more difficult, obviously, in community engaged centers. We have people that have done work, or in students and others who are active, but they also have several different kind of claims at the institution. So you might have somebody who is very community engaged or continues to be, but some maybe other group might say, oh, I know that person might have interest around community engagement, but you know what? They're a graduate of the geography department. So in those cases, sometimes they're kind of seen as off the list. So in that sense, there's not a super clear constituency, and these can result in turf issues where you're kind of standing in line around of can we potentially get in the door with some major prospects who other constituencies might lay a larger claim to working with them. This is kind of an ongoing issue across a lot of places. You may have less of this issue if you're at a small private college or maybe community college, where it's more collaborative and just the scale is smaller. So that could be an advantage, but at the bigger institutions, this is something to consider. One of the quotes I love from a piece, this was institutional strategic leader in a campus compact publication a while back from Andrew Seligson, who said, I love this, you are unlikely to achieve anything significant using only the resources directly under your control. You'll need other people's money, or other people's expertise, and other people's relationships. This is certainly the true statement in terms of thinking about advancing your community engaged work in a way that's mutually beneficial, outside the community, and really within the institution as well, and seeing people together on this. So the last two slides before I want to open it for a conversation is to say, so what are some takeaways? So what can I do to enhance maybe the chance of success in fundraising for engagement? So one of the main takeaways, so Bobby mentioned this Engagement Academy. One thing that we talk about the Engagement Academy for university leaders, that's around planning and organizational change, is embedding your engagement agenda and priorities into, it's not listed here, but what keeps your leaders up at night? And that is the strategic directions of the institution. So thinking about your engagement agenda as it's leveraged as a strategy to enhance the student experience, recruit students and faculty. This is linked also to diversity, equity, inclusion, the impact of research, because if this becomes another standalone goal outside of the goals the university already cares about, this will quickly wither. So it has to be seen as deeply integrated. And related to that, contributing to the spaces where some of this innovation may occur. So for example, here at Minnesota, we're undergoing investigation around undergraduate curriculum redesign, sustainability goals, where engagement is part of the conversation to say, we think about undergraduate, what they need to know in this diverse and changing, challenging society. Engagement provides a strategy, engaged teaching and learning, to do this work. So it's positioning this clearly. Finally, in this slide here, the case statement for fundraising. There's always a temptation, we all have it, to say, oh, if I really could get money for this staff position, this, that, and the other thing, it becomes very functional. The case statement for fundraising around the work should be more around what the terminology in the advancement is around the margin of excellence. So how would giving to this center, for example, of community engagement, make this center preeminent in a way that really serves our community, our state, and society, and to avoid the impression that donor money might be going to keep the lights on. So I think that's a really important point in terms of positioning that. And then the last thing that I would say is, what can we do to enhance the success? Are to this notion of create sense-making forums. And this is a shameless plug for the reading that I think was put on your Zoom today. It's around resource development. And one of the things we know is that there are opportunities for people to understand and create a new mindset around how we think about this work. So these could be special forums or gatherings or meetings, having people explain and talk through how engagement can be a strategy to build the long-term sustainability and health of the institution in a way that really impacts our communities. I reference in here in that article, there's a rubric that allows you to ask some questions around where do we score in this area and these particular dimensions around how we leverage this in fundraising, but also retention or state relations and these other areas. So that article talks about that. Another thing that would be important to consider is engagement in support of ongoing campaigns of the institution. So people around your campuses are already raising money for scholarships, professorships, things like that. Could we, based on what we know about what donors want to be involved with, consider professorships that might be engaged scholar professorships in these different areas, where the purpose of the professorship is to use engaged approaches to their work. And position yourself as an important volunteer, again, using that language, not as the one that we would kind of use it, but how advancement uses it, and that is somebody whom they might go with to consider asking a particular gift. And this last, second to last one is there's this notion of embracing life in the middle. And for the purpose of the time, I'm just referencing this, which I think is a great book. It's Gallows and Bowman. It's called Reframing Academic Leadership. And what they talk about is the unique role of what they call like shuttle diplomacy. And that is in these leading from the middle roles that many of us have, you have to go across various constituencies laterally. You're managing above with the provost, you're managing grassroots in the way that you can broker opportunities where fundraising can be mutually beneficial across various domains. And that's that could be kind of its own set of professional development around that work, which we do actually at Engagement Academy. And I would say, just kind of with leaving time here for discussion, that these are practices that create a gateway for private support. And I think the takeaway hopefully here is the most valuable, you're very valuable to your institution, not only for the great work you're already doing, but as a very strategic partner in thinking about the long-term financial health of your institution. And so it's for those of you and all of us to think of ourselves in that way and be kind of strategic in those kind of directions. So I want to kind of end there with knowing that the time goes fast, and to open opportunities for questions or thoughts that people have that they want to share, or maybe some success stories or things that they might have, or challenges. Any thoughts from the group? And you can use the chat as well.
Hi, I'm Carrie from Auburn University. How are you? We're glad to be here. I do have a question for you. I am an advancement officer. I'm new to outreach. It's a new position within advancement and the Office of Outreach to do fundraising on behalf of all the great work that's happening in the unit. And I'm curious, in part of your approach, maybe in the past, or advice on positioning outreach fundraising as a whole unit, or focusing on strategic projects within units that fall under the outreach's umbrella.
Thank you. So just so that I'm clear, so is your constituency the Office of Outreach and Engagement? Is that right?
It's the Office of University Outreach, and we have 8 departments
I see.
that focus on different areas of outreach. So education, health, nutrition, and then professional and continuing education. Okay.
And are these somewhat kind of related to Extension? Is Auburn, I can't remember.
We partner with Extension. So
Okay.
Extension is its own unit, but we partner heavily with them.
Does Extension have their own development officer?
They don't, but I can help with that if they need it.
Okay. So I think based on what we've kind of learned in our research over the years, there's a couple ways to think about this. I think when you think about the prospects, what they're most drawn to, what seems to be the sweet spot, is around their own care, in this case for Auburn, or whatever connection there, but then kind of this Venn diagram where their kind of commitment to societal kind of issues. So talking about outreach and engagement is a way that will speak to, I think, those kind of things. So how might this make Auburn kind of preeminent in its work in serving the state? And thinking about that angle, and then how it transforms the institution in these different ways. So from that standpoint, I think it's embedding these kind of asks or solicitations into the work that you're already working on. So as I kind of mentioned, maybe you're doing some research in various communities that it's not maybe taking as compelling approach to engagement as a strategy of doing this, but actually embedding that into the ask with the university more broadly as a partner along with the institution. So I think what I would mean by that is, let's say you might be in the past raising money for like a professorship linked to that work. I think you could attract donors in a way that sees the multiple benefits of that, not only to supporting the university and their achievement, but the greater state and their particular initiative. So I think you're in a unique space because you probably also compete with donor or constituencies that would claim the kind of alumni and people in their colleges. Is that correct?
Yes, we do have development officers across units, and each unit does have some specific outreach initiatives that they work on. I am very fortunate, though, that we're pretty collaborative and open to working together. So I've come from a background where there was a lot of that territoriality. We're very fortunate here that mind shift has been changing and is much better and much more open to collaboration with other advancements and officers and other units.
Great. Yeah. And one quick thing I would add to that too. So when I was at the graduate school of Wisconsin, we were similar. And the strange thing about the graduate school is nobody's actually a graduate of the graduate school. A graduate school is more of an administrative office. So for us to have success, we had a $100 million campaign for graduate fellowships. My role was actually to go to all the college and say, how can I come alongside of you to put graduate education as a priority and working with you for graduate education to support your college. And so that case, they saw that as a priority. So we were able to really raise a lot of money for graduate education, although a lot of it didn't stay in our own unit at the graduate school. Okay. So that might be something to think about too, is that you're helping these other colleges do this in an engaged way. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes. Great. Thank you.
Just while we're waiting for another question, Carrie, I think something that just for the couple people that have their screens on, I'm curious whether folks would be interested in hearing more about how Auburn was successful in making the case to create your position. Because I think that's part of what people are up against is like, how were they successful in getting a dedicated capacity, even at the divisional level, to advance the work? And I just see a couple of people shaking their heads. So I'll definitely follow up, because I think that is part of our challenge here is campuses are really wondering, how do I make the, like, I'm interested, I bet a lot of people are saying like, how did they get that? How did they get a U? Like, so I just want to note for folks that are thinking that, I'm also thinking that. And so we have a couple sessions still trying to fill in. So I feel like that might be one to look into.
Oh, did you want me to talk about that now or future? Sorry.
No, I think we'll come back to it. I just wanted to let anybody know who was on the screen that might be thinking, I'm curious how Auburn was successful in that and how we can help make the case on our own campuses. I see Laura wants to go ahead and ask a question.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I have never been excited about fundraising before, but I'm actually excited in this conversation, and I appreciate you setting up this whole series. I'm looking forward to it. The timing is actually perfect for us at Buffalo State. Bobby knows our president, Dr. Conway Turner, is retiring. She has been extremely dedicated to community engagement. And so as I'm not sure what the language is in institutional advancement, but as a fundraising effort around her retirement, the advancement office has selected civic engagement, community engagement as a kind of key area. So they had asked me to put forward a list of projects. I've worked with a number of people. We kind of put forward these projects, but the idea you gave of a case statement that ties the whole thing together is really resonating with me, so that it isn't just these specific projects or ideas, but really how it's transformational to the center and to the direction that the institution really sees itself going. It is absolutely perfect. So I guess just kind of, I don't really have a direct question, but I think just kind of given what I've said about this campaign that we're entering into literally this month, any recommendations you might have? I'm going to send the link to this to the advancement people and try to attend some of the future sessions together with them as we build a stronger relationship between my unit and the advancement office as we start those conversations. But just would appreciate any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, thanks. It's really exciting that this is an opportunity in front of you, because I think there's so many pieces that could fit together. I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is sometimes in our office, we talk about that this work is not necessarily about engagement, but it's more around transformation. So it's around how do we transform these institutions to be ones that are engaged in society in a way that makes a difference for a community, but also sustains us in a way to really be kind of preeminent in doing this work in the world. So it's kind of creating that excitement around it. And to your point, Laura, too, is that this becomes then kind of like a leadership, like an organizing principle for the institution. And some of this other work that I've kind of done also relates to how institutions make sense of themselves in their deep story about how they talk about themselves. So it has to be linked to kind of the saga. There's language around like organizational saga of like, when I was at Wisconsin, they talked about the Wisconsin idea. If any of you ever heard of that, but it's basically this notion, and I won't get into it. We only have 6 minutes left, but it's basically that every institution may have a narrative by which they situate this work to be able to build an exciting kind of bridge from the past to an exciting future. So there's that symbolic element, but then there's a strategic element, to your point, the institution, but then how do we serve our community and bring in maybe new donors that would have never thought of giving to the university, but for which they have this new vision that's more collaborative. So that is all to say is that I'm excited and encourage you to do that and to kind of connect the dots through that. And again, if you don't mind the shameless plug of this article that's online, actually that's on Zoom, is a way to kind of connect those things like across the institution. So anyway, and it tells a little bit about the saga stuff too. So, and if you'd ever want to, connect about that, I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Thanks. I appreciate that very much.
Hey, David, it's Greg.
Hey, Greg.
I have a question for you. Good to see you. Good to see so many familiar folks on the screen today. Any insights you've gleaned either through your research or just your experience on keeping the team together? Because these asks are not usually something that the engagement officer does on their own. So I can speak to the donor intent and how it relates to our engagement work and vision. We usually have somebody from advancement at the table who knows all the particulars about the different ways that a donor could give. But depending on the size of the organization of the university, the donor, when they're thinking about going from sort of a endowed plan gift to a transformational level gift in exchange for naming rights or something, they want an audience with the president or the chief advancement officer, some very senior leader. And I found in my experience, it's been tricky to make sure we're all on the same page when we're ready to close the deal. Had an experience a while ago where I thought, advancement and I were ready to move this donor from an endowment up to transformational gift. But then when they met with the president, they got an earful about what was on the president's mind that day, not knowing so much about closing the deal. And so it's a little awkward for me to go back, to the president and say, hey, you really play your part that we needed you to play in that conversation. Those are sensitive, issues to approach. So just wondering if you've gleaned any insight around knowing who the team is internally that's going to help you close the deal and how to keep that team operating from the same playbook through closure.
That's a really great question, Greg. And I know we're kind of coming to the end of time here, but a quick story I'm going to have to tell because I can't resist telling it is I remember at Wisconsin, there was a similar kind of thing and they were going to ask somebody for, I think it was like $20 million. And the strategy in here, you ask for the specific amount, the 20 million. And so they were all sitting around and they asked this money and then you're to be silent at the end and let them respond. And so the dean got nervous because it was silent. And after they asked for the 20 million, he blurted out, or whatever you can afford, which like completely destroyed the, anyway, that's this whole kind of thing. But I think what it has to do with, and maybe this is in conversation with your development staff, is there's a whole kind of set of training and orientation for how to do this work. And if you have a president or people at the level who are open to kind of influence and discussion around this, to have very concrete strategy directions on even these kind of things. Like after you ask, you just kind of let them respond. And so there's kind of a theater to this, and just making people aware that this is kind of, there's a lot of elements to this. And depend on the relationship that people have with the president, and that may or may not be you. It might be the lead vice president for advancement. But I think there comes a point where those conversations have to be kind of put together. Those are just kind of my initial thoughts in a couple of minutes, but.
I think we are just about out of time with 1 minute to go. So I'm going to wrap it there. But the great news is that we're beginning this series with David, and we're going to end the series with David. So David's going to be back with us to wrap this up. I don't have a date yet because we have a couple sessions I want to fill in. And I wanted to kind of ping those real quick for folks that are on here in case you have an idea. The next one is going to be something that's happening during the Truckin conference, which is our network of R1 institutions. So that one we're going to be recording. That's on endowed centers and institutes, and we're going to share the recording. We have someone, Laurel's on here, somebody from Laurel's team is going to be providing the video production. So that'll be great. We'll get that to everybody. I love that you guys are already thinking about how do you do this with teams. We'd love for you. We want to encourage that. The next session after that will be April 25th from 2 to 3. Everybody, you should have been able to register for it because it's a series, but we're going to send you another email. That one is on very specific thing. It's on donor funded professorships and internship programs. So it's, again, this kind of very tangible thing that might help you give an example of what is fundable out there, including public service fellows programs, some internship programs at the undergraduate and graduate level, and then an endowed professorship in civil discourse. So excited to showcase those. And then after that, we're doing a session in May with a date I do not have yet on earmarks. And we're going to be featuring 2 institutions, one who is on here, which is Gia from Loyola University in Maryland. And then Rutgers Camden is also going to be featured. Both of those institutions receive federal earmarks this cycle to advance community engagement projects. If there is another person that you know of who received a federal earmark, I'd love to have a third institution in that conversation. We're also going to have a federal policy expert come on and talk about the cycle overall around federal earmarks, particularly given the change we've just had in Congress and how institutions can be thinking about being most successful. Then we're going to have 2 other sessions where I'm looking for ideas. I have a couple already. One is around corporate engagement and sponsorships. So looking for specific examples of how institutions have successfully worked with corporate partners to advance the work. And then the second is going to be this kind of question, Carrie, that's what came up for me, just around development and probably a conversation with development professionals. If someone identified from a community college already, and I think Carrie might be another great example, but putting you on the spot, Carrie, for that, because what we want to showcase is like a real conversation of how do you create a productive relationship with development professionals? What do they want from all of us that are in the field? So those are the sessions that we have coming. We're going to keep telling you guys all about it. I appreciate the positive comments in the chat. And reach out to me directly if I miss anyone on here. I think everyone has my email address, but I'm going to put it in the chat. It's pretty easy to find. But if you have ideas on any of the things I just mentioned, please just shoot me an email directly, whether it's about your institution or somebody you know. And thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, David.
Thank you all. Great to be with you.
Thank you.